3 years and 23 days ago, we witnessed one of the best games in sports history. The Philadelphia Eagles defeated the New England Patriots in Super Bowl 52 with a backup quarterback starting the entire game. Football fans everywhere rejoiced as the Patriots dynasty had finally lost and Philadelphia went wild. We saw by the crazy parties and riots in the street that night just how much this win meant to the city and its fans, and the rest of the NFL was celebrating along with them. The game itself was a close one, and it was one of, if not the best games I have ever seen. It ended with a final score of 41-33. Both Nick Foles and Tom Brady had over 400 yards, but the Eagles' defense was able to hold strong at the end of the game to get them the win. But now, here we are. 3 seasons have officially passed since that legendary Super Bowl run for Philly, and now they're firing their head coach. Almost the entire roster from the Super Bowl is gone, and the last remaining stars from the team are on their way out. From the way it sounds, there's a ridiculous amount of infighting going on within the organization as every member of the front office tries to save their job. What happened to this team? Today we're going to be figuring that out. We're going to chart exactly how a team whose future looked so bright just 3 years ago got to this point, and figuring out who the main culprits are for this insane situation. To start out, we need to go back to 2016. The Eagles hired Doug Peterson to replace their infamous former head coach Chip Kelly, who was despised at this point by the entire fan base for his idiotic play calling and roster changes. Peterson came in while Philly kept their GM Howie Roseman, who had been with them since 2000. The Eagles already had the 8th pick in the draft that year, but the front office agreed that they couldn't afford to pass up on one of the top quarterbacks in the draft that year, so they traded the 8th pick and a few others to the Cleveland Browns for the 2nd overall pick in the draft. Come draft night, the Rams took Jared Goff 1st overall, leaving the Eagles with the other big prospect, Carson Wentz from North Dakota State. Heading into the 2016-17 season, the Eagles' future was looking bright. They had a new quarterback, a new coach, and a new culture. People knew this wouldn't necessarily be the year, but they'd be back to a contending level soon enough. During the 2016 season, the Carson Wentz pick started to turn some heads in the wrong direction, as he underperformed majorly for a 2nd overall pick. He had 3,782 yards, 16 touchdowns, and 14 interceptions, and he completed about 62% of his passes. The Eagles went 7-9 though, and it was Wentz's first year, so fans weren't too upset with it, and figured he needed a little bit more time to develop before they started calling for his job. This turned out to be, or at least it seemed by the 2017 season, to be the right move. 13 games into the 2017-18 slate, the Eagles were 11-2. Carson Wentz was a heavy MVP favorite, having 3,296 yards, 33 touchdowns, and 7 interceptions, a far cry from his last year. The Eagles were being looked at as possibly the best team in the NFC, and many people were expecting them to make the Super Bowl. But that all changed in Week 14 against the Rams. On a goal line scramble in the 3rd quarter, Carson Wentz tore his ACL and sent shockwaves through the Eagles fan base and the NFL. He would be out for the season, and suddenly the Eagles' playoff hopes lied in the hands of their backup quarterback Nick Foles. Foles came in off the bench and won 2 of the 3 remaining games. The Eagles ended the season 13-3 as the 1 seed in the NFC, but most people had already counted them out of Super Bowl contention now that their MVP quarterback was out. Miraculously in the divisional round, the Eagles stayed afloat against the 6th seed Falcons, winning 15-10, but the game was ugly. The defense had to step up big time thanks to mistakes by the offense, and they barely squeaked out a win against a team they should have dominated. The next week told a completely different story, though, as they played the Minnesota Vikings, who were hot off of one of the best plays of all time, the Minneapolis Miracle.
Keenum's going to try to work the ball on the boundary. Keenum steps into it, pass is caught! Diggs! Sideline! Touchdown! Unbelievable! Vikings win it!
The Eagles absolutely destroyed the Vikings in the NFC Championship game, winning 38-7 and moving on to the Super Bowl to face the ever-looming threat of Tom Brady and Bill Belichick in the AFC, who always seemed to be around during the 2010s. Like I said before, this was one of the best Super Bowls I can remember, but the Eagles were able to win the shootout, 41-33, shocking the world. Their backup quarterback Nick Foles outplayed Tom Brady and won Super Bowl MVP, and Philadelphia was on top of the world. Now, we're going to cover the next 2 seasons pretty fast here because they're pretty much the same. In 2018, the Eagles fell off a fair amount. They went 9-7 and made the playoffs. They beat the Bears in the wild card round on the famous double doink play, but lost a heartbreaker to the Saints in the divisional round, which ended with a walk-off interception on a ball that went right through Alshon Jeffrey's hands. Oh, did I mention that Carson Wentz got hurt again, setting a trend and starting a narrative that he might have injury problems? This will come up later as an issue. Nick Foles led this playoff run for the second year in a row. Keep in mind that over this offseason, the Eagles, thinking that Wentz was their future, gave him a 4-year, $128 million contract that we see now as a terrible idea. At the time, it was the largest contract in history. For 2019, the Eagles had the same record of 9-7, but this time lost in the wild card round to the Seahawks. It was pretty obvious to everyone that the Eagles needed some changes to be made, because they now had 2 early playoff exits on 9-7 seasons since winning the Super Bowl. To address this, in the 2020 draft, they surprised everyone, taking Oklahoma quarterback Jalen Hurts in the second round, putting pressure on Carson Wentz to step it up. It would probably help to know that Carson Wentz got hurt again in that wild card game against the Seahawks, so injuries were officially considered an issue with him at this point. Come the 2020 season, nobody really knew what to think of this team. Many of their key pieces from 2017, 18, and even 19 were already gone, and Wentz would be playing behind a suspect offensive line. These concerns were met head-on in Week 1 in an embarrassing loss to Washington, in which Carson Wentz was sacked 8 times. What was considered to be the best offensive line and quarterback in the league a few years ago began to completely fall apart throughout the next few games. Come Week 13 against the Packers, the Eagles were getting blown out by the best team in the NFC this year, and Doug Peterson decided to put Jalen Hurts in. This would be the last game action we'd see of Carson Wentz in the 2020 season. He ended with a record of 3-8-1. He had 2,600 yards, 16 touchdowns, 15 interceptions, and 10 fumbles. He turned the ball over an astounding 25 times, averaging about 2 turnovers every game. Jalen Hurts came in and threw for about 100 yards, 1 touchdown, and 1 interception in the second half, and the Eagles decided to give him the go-ahead as the starting quarterback for the rest of the season, as he seems to be their future guy at the time I'm making this video. Jalen played pretty well down the stretch considering the situation was in, with the worst O-line and some of the worst weapons in the league. He even led the Eagles to a massive upset win over the Saints in Week 14, who had finished 12-4 and the number 2 seed in the NFC. The Eagles' season came to a head in Week 17, and the final game of the 2020 regular season, which at the time of this video was only last week. It was Sunday Night Football against Washington, and it was a very close game, despite meaning nothing to the Eagles, who had already been eliminated from playoff contention. Jalen Hurts was playing pretty well against Washington's strong defensive line, and by the mid-third quarter, the Eagles were only down 3 points. This was when Doug Peterson made perhaps the most questionable move any coach made last season, and decided to put in third-string quarterback Nate Sudfeld. To put it simply, Doug Peterson was tanking. He was losing on purpose, but it was incredibly obvious. With a win, the Eagles would get the 9th pick in the draft, but with a loss, they'd get the 6th. This apparently rubbed just about every player on the Eagles the wrong way, with inside sources saying that players had to be restrained from attacking their own coach on the sidelines, which is unheard of. Add to that, benched Carson Wentz still had the loyalty of members of the 2017 roster that still remained. Key players of that team like Fletcher Cox, Jason Kelce, and Zach Ertz, who were all looked to as leaders this year, still considered Carson Wentz to be their leader and the leader of the team. These tensions grew throughout the weeks since Carson Wentz got benched, and it became increasingly obvious that very few, if any, of these veterans would be around next year, and the entire locker room culture fell apart. Today, we got official word that head coach Doug Peterson was being fired, coming as a surprise to many. Carson Wentz, Zach Ertz, and Jason Kelce all shared an obviously emotional moment together after the loss to Washington, staying out on the field for hours after the game. It's hard to watch as an NFL fan, as that was the core 3 players on the 2017 offense, and they'll most likely never play another down of football together again. General manager Howie Roseman still seems like he'll be around for at least another season as of the time I'm writing this script, but it's fairly obvious that over the coming months, he'll do what he can to basically scrap the remains of the 2017 roster for picks and cap space, things to rebuild. Carson Wentz will probably be on the move. Whether the Eagles cut him or attempt to trade his massive contract, that's still up in the air, but it's pretty safe to say at this point he's not going to be part of the team next year. The Eagles are entering rebuild mode now, which is crazy considering they were the NFL champions such a short time ago. If anything, this entire story just goes to show that you cannot get too comfortable with victory in the NFL, because one wrong move can screw over your entire organization for years.